better. Okay. I have the distinct honor today to introduce two people, Professor Jeff Rosensweig and Dr. Helene Gayle. Jeff is an associate professor of international business and finance here at Emory. He's also the director of the Global Perspectives program. He's previously worked at the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta. He's taught at MIT and at Yale. He has his PhD from MIT, his master's from Oxford, and a master's MBA from Yale. Very impressive. And he has the honor to interview Dr. Helene Gayle today. Dr. Gayle is the president and CEO of CARE. She is one of the top 50 women leaders as voted by the Wall Street Journal. She is the first woman, the first doctor, and the first African American to lead CARE. She serves on the boards of the Institute of Medicine, the Council of Foreign Relations, and she just completed a 2-year term as the president of the International AIDS Society. She's worked at the CDC for over 20 years. She, prior to her role at CARE, she was the director of HIV, TB, and reproductive health for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has her medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, and she's a graduate of Barnard College at Columbia University. So please join me in welcoming Professor Rosensweig and Dr. Helene Gayle.
Well, we'll start in right away because although Helene is a great public speaker, she enjoys the Q&A with students. And I'll ask her some questions just so you can kind of see where she's coming from to prepare your own questions. Also, I guess we've known each other too many years than we care to admit, as I've seen Helene lead really what is a major part of CDC before Bill Gates asked her to come out and really basically teach him about what's going on with public health. It is interesting, Helene, before I ask you questions, when I heard them introduce you, I didn't realize you were so many years at CDC. I think it was about 6 years in Seattle with Gates, a couple of years now here. You have all those college degrees, Ivy League undergrad, med degree, MPH at the top MPH program, probably a medical residency. Because I know you're 42. You must have gone to college at like 12.
Not quite.
All right.
I'm a little older than 42. I just read that book that you wrote. That book about graceful aging.
Yeah, graceful aging.
Right.
I had you in mind. But, you know, obviously we're interested in CARE at the school, and you've been speaking to our dean about ways we interact with CARE. Successful organizations change with the times and the needs. Could you bring the students a little bit about the original role of CARE, the mission when you got there, the recent mission, and maybe any new campaigns that you're really helping inspire?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and this is a school that is near and dear to my heart, partly because you've invited me here often, and it's been great to get to meet the different students and wonderful to meet your dean, and so just very pleased to be here. Let me just start by asking how many people realize that CARE, the organization that I'm working is the organization that started the CARE package. All right, most people think, and as you can tell by the few hands, most people think it's something that your parents invented to send you off to college. It wasn't. So CARE's roots began right after World War II, 1945. CARE was an organization that was founded to really help provide support and relief to people in Europe after the ravages of World War II. So we started as a relief organization, sending off care packages. And it was really a cooperative of several not-for-profit organizations, some that were based, that were affiliated with religious organizations, some that weren't, but that kind of banded together to be part of the big effort to rebuild Europe after World War II. And it was really seen as a real symbol of the American people's generosity to, particularly to countries that one day, the day before, they had been enemies with, and then the next day wanted to say, you know, we're over with that, that's done with, now we want to see how we can build a peaceful world. So that's kind of the tradition of care, is really seeing itself as being part of public diplomacy, being part of a peace effort and an effort to build security and provide relief to people in emergency situations. Well, obviously, Europe is back on its feet, and the need to provide relief there is no longer a priority. And so what CARE did after World War II and after the rebuilding of Europe was to say, well, we have this incredible infrastructure now that's able to provide emergency relief more broadly, and started to extend its mission to Asian countries first, and then increasingly other parts of the world where disasters and emergencies struck. And we really started as an organization that really focused on people in urgent situations. How do you give them basic needs, whether it's water, whether it's food, whether it's shelter? Increasingly, again, as we think about how organizations evolve, while the need for emergency and disaster relief continues, we also recognize that these same communities that were often ravaged by whether it's natural disasters or man-made disasters, usually the ones that aren't able to bounce back after an emergency tend to be those who have the least, that are in the most dire circumstances to begin with, so people living in poverty. If a disaster strikes in this country, and we've had, unfortunately, some situations where we haven't rebounded as well, but in general, we're able to keep on going. But if you live in a poor community and a disaster strikes, you're not as able to be as resilient as developed countries are. So we move from working on natural disasters for all to really focusing on how do we help communities in greatest need, and then made longer-term commitments to those communities and those countries in which we were working. And so many of the countries that we've been working in, we may have gone first because of a disaster, but then made a long-term commitment to those communities and realized that the needs were far more than just that immediate situation. We've also moved very much from looking only at disaster situations to really looking at long-term sustainable development. And in many ways, you know, to kind of take the give a person a fish analogy, we've moved from giving a person to fish to teaching them to fish, and now really even looking beyond that to saying, well, why aren't there any fish in the stream to begin with? Is it because there are polluters upstream? Is it because people don't have the fishing rights when they should, et cetera? So we've got to move from giving a fish to teaching a fish to looking at, you know, why are there not any fish in the stream to begin with, and looking at the underlying causes as well as the manifestations that go along with conditions of poverty. We're now in 70 countries around the world. We have a staff of about 13,000 people. Most of those are people who come from the countries in which we work. Budget of about $650 million, and really with a goal of continuing to work with communities to ultimately end extreme poverty around the world, and to work with communities not only on the things that are oftentimes most evident when you think about poor communities: lack of health care, lack of water, lack of food, lack of access to education, but also looking at the underlying causes. Why do people in societies, why do some people, even in the context of economic growth, still are not able to take advantage of that? And that's often because they are marginalized within societies, because they don't have a knowledge of what their own rights are, because they're women and are discriminated against, minority communities within countries. So we work on both, not only the immediate consequences of poverty, but also what are the underlying causes, and try to put that together in a way that give people a sustainable opportunity to improve their capacity to change their lives and the lives of their future generations. So that's who we are today, and that's kind of how we've evolved as an organization.
And I do urge everyone to go to the CARE website, where you can learn a lot about campaigns to empower women and things that Helene had brought. Helene, you talked about fighting poverty and the evolution of CARE, but you have a Master's of Public Health. Some of these students are MBA, MPHs. Could you talk about the role of public health in economic development, because that's very important to business, but also how can business, including the people here who become business leaders, how can they help fight poverty sustainably?
Yeah, and let me just go back to something you said, and then I'll answer that question. But one of the things I didn't mention was our real focus on women and girls, and that is something that we have put a real priority on in all of our work, because women and girls are disproportionately impacted by poverty, but investing in women and girls is also the best way of having long-term change in communities. And so all the studies show that if you give a woman an opportunity for economic growth, she uses her resources in ways that actually change her children's future by sending her children to school or investing in communities in different ways. So it's a real focus of ours, and hopefully you'll see in airports our I Am Powerful campaign that talks about the power of investing in women. So just to point that out. Yeah, I think clearly health has a real link to economic growth and also to poverty. People who don't have access to clean water, education, health services, et cetera, obviously have less good health, and people who have poor health are also not able to often to work, to take care of their families, et cetera, and poor health is oftentimes a catalyst for people slipping further and further into poverty. It's the case here in our own country, where we see that by not having access to health finance for all people, oftentimes catastrophic illness is what puts people into financial straits in this country, and it's even more the case for people who are living on the margin to begin with. So there's a real link between poor health and poverty and vice versa. But we also know that by investing in health is a great way of improving economic growth within societies. There's a report that was done from the World Health Organization called the WHO Commission on Macroeconomics and Health that looked at what would it take to invest in health in a way that would actually increase economic productivity. And so, for example, by just investing $34 for a basic package of health services was enough to actually have somewhere in the range of $200 billion savings globally. So, we know that there's this very tight link between improving health and also improving economies. And there's, a lot of evidence to show that. And obviously, improving health isn't enough to make economies grow, but it's a real precondition in many cases. I think that people in business have a lot that can be done to improve the health of populations and to contribute to global poverty more broadly. Clearly, I think the partnerships that are developing between the private sector and the public sector, or the private sector and the not-for-profit sector, really is showing that those kinds of partnerships have a lot more potential to take what an organization like I work for, take what we do and extend it in ways that are very, very useful. So we've had a lot of experience working with the private sector on providing basic services. HIV treatment is one that I think particularly the business community has taken on a real strong role in many countries where HIV has had a disproportionate impact on providing health services, providing HIV treatment, and being able to really provide community-based services that make a difference not only for people living with HIV, but the communities in which they live. So I think there's a lot of ways in which the business sector with its infrastructure can be a real positive force for health, and also a real positive force for the work that we do more broadly in global poverty. We have some incredible partnerships with businesses like Coca-Cola, for instance, on water, where obviously water is key to the work that Coke does around the world, and being able to be both good in terms of conserving water, but also helping communities to develop access to safe and clean water has been core to their business success. And so we've been a real partner with Coke. Starbucks, working in communities, coffee growing communities, helping them on the community development side of what they're trying to do in communities where they are growing coffee. So I think there's a lot of potential, more and more, for seeing how the not-for-profit world and the for-profit world can come together. And more people are talking about this whole concept of the triple bottom line. I'm sure you all talk about that, where the business success, social success, and environmental success is more and more what particularly multinational corporations are looking at, is not just what's good for the business interest is ultimately going to be enhanced by looking at the social good and the environmental good. So, I think there's a lot of potential there.
I even thought as you spoke about your initiatives in microfinance with, for instance, the second largest bank in India, which will be good for both of you and very good for people in India and, as you say, for women. As I think about my students, we're in a post-Enron world, a subprime mess world, and I'm sure, Dean Larry, you notice this as well. More and more of them seem interested in sustainable development. Maybe a career in an NGO, in a non-government organization, a charity, not just pursuing a standard business for profit business career. And of course, we hope some of them pursue profit careers. But as you look at people,
we need profit.
We need someone to come back and pay for all this. But interestingly, I think you must be able, because you have hired a lot of people and promoted people. There must be something that makes someone a very successful professional or executive in an NGO type setting. And there might be characteristics that would make them very good in a for-profit world, but not as good in an NGO world. So it's a two-part question. What are some things that you think distinguish someone who could be a leader in an NGO world? And as we look at that as well, let's say someone in here had the urge one day to make a difference in an NGO world. Would you suggest, they try to get a job at a care, et cetera, or should they go out into the business world or the world of finance for a number of years and then try to transition?
I think that was more than two questions.
I lost track.
Well, let me try to answer that. I'm not sure that the qualities are that different. And I think today, more and more, what the requirements to be good in the NGO world and what the requirements are to be good in the for-profit world, I think are coming closer and closer together. And again, because I think companies are starting to think about their missions differently. Obviously, a for-profit entity has to make profit or it won't stay around. But I think that the line between, quote, doing good and making profit is, in fact, getting blurred. I think more and more companies recognize that corporate social responsibility is good for their business, that their workers feel better about working for a company that does good beyond what makes shareholders happy. And I think for us in the NGO world, or even when I was in government, I think looking at things in a much more business-like way, looking much more for results, looking much more for impact, being able to measure those things, even with things that are considered soft and difficult to measure, like empowerment. How do you measure empowerment? Well, I think that if you deconstruct what that means, you actually can measure it. And so I think we're thinking a lot more about things that would be classically thought of as in the business sector, like results and impact and bottom lines and returns and investment. The returns are for different things. They're not for dollars, they are for human capital and changing people's lives and having impact on disease states. So I think that, in some ways, I'm not sure that the characteristics are all that different today. And I think the same things that make you successful, the ability to keep learning and learn new things, the ability to learn how to work in teams, all the things that I think are part of modern day management are the same for both sides of it. I guess I really, I am a firm believer that there is no right way to do a career. I think you take advantage of opportunities as they come along. So you graduate from here and get a great offer at a for-profit company, learn what you can, and transfer that when the next opportunity comes for you to work for an NGO or vice versa. So I just think, in this day and age, careers are much more fluid. I think there's a lot more transferable skills, and having a good idea of what your kind of guiding principles are, what are the things that you are passionate about, what are the things that drive you, and being very clear about that. I think you'll probably go back and forth between different sectors and different sorts of careers over your time. So I think there is no one right way, except everybody coming to work for CARE sometimes.
Exactly. In terms of this idea of maybe transitioning, maybe something more personal, you were right there when Bill Gates made a transition less and less time at Microsoft, and now I guess almost none, into being very concerned with public health and things you were working on, like actual vaccines themselves. Can you share a little bit, just a little bit about either his transition or even some of his habits of mind or working that have made him so successful and compelling?
Yeah, I think, well, what's made him so successful, he's incredibly brilliant and incredibly focused. He really is somebody who can take lots of information and learn new things. During the time that I was there, it was incredible how much he learned about the HIV, as the virus, and all about vaccine science and all the rest of it. I mean, he is somebody who learns quickly and learns a lot and has a very, very, a real quest for knowledge. So, and has good strategy sense. One of the things I remember him saying one time, just a little, kind of a simple sort of thing, but that he reads a lot, and he reads a lot of different kinds of things. And sometimes, that seems kind of simple, but somebody keeping their mind able to learn in all different ways. I mean, he reads novels, he reads science, he reads math, he reads history. And I do think that ability to be very flexible about the inputs is something, and I think you write about that in your book.
Got to push my foot, but thank you.
I read it. I wanted to know about graceful aging or whatever it was. But anyway, but I think that ability to keep an elastic mind is one thing. I think it's been really interesting to see the transformation. Bill and Melinda Gates both come from families who have a tradition of being very socially active and being civically minded. Bill Gates' parents were big community leaders. His mother's now deceased, but his father is still very much a part of the Seattle society and fabric. So they grew up with that around the dinner tables. It was something that was very much a part of growing up. But I think, he went off and did a very different kind of career, but it was always something that was, part of who he was. It's been very interesting to see that this getting more involved in the philanthropic side of it, I think in many ways has been a more powerful driver for him. And you will hear him talk about it. I just came back from the World Economic Forum, the Davos Forum in January, where he gave this really incredible speech, very passionate about this whole area of corporations and private sector doing good and really doing more on the philanthropic side, and creative capitalism is what he talked about, and really used that as a way of talking about, in some ways, his transformation. And he is incredibly passionate and speaks very passionately about what it does for him to feel good about doing good. And I think there is a reinforcer to that. And there's even work now that says that there's probably some hormonal process that goes on that is self-reinforcing. When you do good and you have this altruistic experience, that it does something to you that's almost touches a pleasure center. And I think it's true. I think that there is something about feeling like you made a difference that's positive, that is in many ways reinforcing. And it's very clear that he says, he thinks that all that he has done in the technology field, his greatest accomplishments will be what he does in the philanthropic field. And so for somebody who has done all that he's done, I think that's quite a statement. And hearing him light up and talk about it is really pretty remarkable. So,
well, Doctor, you were in the middle of it. And maybe when the students ask you questions in a few minutes, your own parents, I think, were instrumental in some of your leadership that may come up. But one thing I was wondering is our school's mission, and I know you and the dean have spoken about ways to coordinate, but our mission is to help generate or help talented young people become principled leaders for global enterprise. And enterprise can be, as you know, NGOs or business. What makes such a leader? Like, as you developed yourself, did you have mentors? Did you have role models? If you have admirable role models, the students would like them. How do they get on the radar screen of someone? Everyone wants someone like yourself or Bill Gates to be their mentor. So a little bit about the development of a principled leader and different things students can do to move on that path.
Yeah, I guess I was fortunate to come up to grow up in a family where giving back was very much a part of my family upbringing. It was just what we were raised to believe we should do, that we were fortunate enough to get a good education and be able to develop careers that could give back. So I think that was just part of who I was. And I think it also probably means that you look for different things in people that you look up to and aspire to. And I think I've been fortunate to have people who, along the way, in a variety of ways, were inspirational. I guess I think people should find individuals who they think have something that is inspirational to them, and not be afraid to ask them to be a mentor, or ask them to help in ways that might be useful. And I think students are often afraid and think, well, nobody, that person isn't going to want to bother with me. But again, back to what I was talking about before, we get something when we give back. If I have the opportunity to mentor, I think I get as much from that interaction as I give. And so I think people, I would just encourage people to find individuals that you feel you have something in common with, that you resonate with, that they have something that you see that you'd like to know more about, and not feel reticent to approach them.
And not just find famous people like
No,
yourself, but there's so many people
like
that
myself.
there is a great joy to mentoring. I think we both know that at the ages we're moving into. And so many people want to have it. I was trying to
We're
now, just so we
solidly middle-aged individuals.
and contemporaries. But just so we move to the students, I have two very short ones, and then we'll move to the students. One is there a story or an anecdote you can share? Because you are supported by, you're friends of so many influential people, famous people, wonderful people. Is there some story or anecdote that you would be comfortable sharing, whether it's fun or revealing or something?
Well, I don't know how revealing I should be, but
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said.
I'm never good at anecdotes, but I guess I would.
Maybe parables that have a meaning.
Yeah. I guess I could say one of the influences that made me sure that I wanted to do a career in public health, and that was, when I was in medical school at the time and wasn't quite sure. I had some vague notion that public health might be a good way of melding my desire to make a difference at a population level with my training in medicine, but didn't have a lot of formal exposure to public health. And I went to a graduation speech for one of my brothers graduating from college, and heard D.A. Henderson speak. D.A. Henderson at that time was the dean of the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, but he was one of the two leaders of the eradication of smallpox, the campaign that eradicated smallpox. And it was pretty impressive for me to sit there and listen to this man talking about how he, with WHO and CDC and in partnership, led this worldwide campaign to wipe off the face of the earth this disease that had been a scourge for centuries. And it just was this sense of this power of what bringing people together around a common cause can do in such a huge way. And that was what really solidified with me that public health was, in fact, something that I wanted to devote my life to, the sense that you really could join together and make that kind of a huge contribution to humankind. It was pretty impressive. So
then when you think the pyramiding, his effect on you and others, your effect on others, it's very powerful.
Very viral.
Yeah, exactly. But we won't mention tipping point. Now, finally, and this is a quick one, looking back, if there was one, I mean, you're famous, you're having a great life, you're at Davos, but if there was one thing you would have done differently in your life, what would it be?
I don't know that there's anything I would do differently. I guess I would probably spend more free time doing, I probably work too much. But besides that, I just am a person who doesn't have too many regrets. I like moving forward. So people often ask me, when I left clinical medicine, do I miss clinical medicine? No, because I was enjoying what I was doing. Now that I've more or less moved out of the health field primarily, they say, well, do you miss being a doctor, or being seen as a doctor, or focusing on public health, or do I miss working on HIV, which I worked on for 20 years? I don't, because I think what I'm doing now is fascinating and really, tremendous, and builds on what I've done in the past. So I don't know. I just can't think of too many things that I regret having done.
Well,
I mean, I'm sure there are some small things like, slapping my sister once or twice. I don't know. I'm sure there are probably some relationships that I regret, but I'm sure there are some things on that level.
Good. That's good.
But overall,
no, and you do
my
have.
sister probably deserved it.
No. And you have a wonderful life. I was just hoping you would say your only regret is with those 3 tremendous
Schools
degrees
that I went to that I didn't get one from Emory.
You didn't get an Emory MBA.
No, but I've thought of it.
Yeah, we have talked about it. Yeah. Well, there's a spot for you.
If I get an MBA, it will be from Emory.
Students, what do you think? Could she get, and then more importantly, is this an inspiring leader for the 21st century? Helene Gayle, Dr. Helene Gayle. Let's thank her first. You can ask questions on any subject. That's a nice way to treat a friend, but she'll answer whatever she wants to answer. So don't be shy. Fire away.
I just had a question about, you were talking about the change, the model from care, from sort of dropping in aid to moving towards community empowerment and participation. And I was just wondering, maybe you could talk about what that process has been like and what the challenges have been. You mentioned before the difficulty of measuring what empowerment means, but I imagine there'd be a lot that would go along with that in terms of coordination, operations, and also that the issue of measurement. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and what measures, what strategies you use.
Yeah, it's a good point. And some of that predates me coming on. It's been a gradual evolution over 60 years, so I haven't been part of all of that. But I think a couple of things. First of all, moving from something that is very tangible to something that is less tangible is harder to get people to understand what it is you do. So it's very easy to say we ship food to people, and that's very tangible. But when you start talking to people, and this is particularly when it comes to how do you raise resources to do the things that you do, it's a lot more difficult to go and say sell empowerment than selling food or education, or building a school versus the right to education, or digging wells versus talking about how do you engage the community to be able to sustain access to clean and safe water. So I think it does mean, first of all, figuring out how do you explain that to people in a tangible enough way that they get why that still is something that costs, and it's still something that is concrete and makes a difference in people's lives. And so I think there's that. I think it's also retooling our staff, because it's a very different thing to be the person who delivers a service directly than being the person who teaches somebody else to deliver the service, or who teaches somebody to work with developing communities capacity. And that can range from just helping people develop management skills, to helping people to analyze information so that they understand how to actually figure out what their needs are in the context of community development, or working with governments to build their capacity so they can provide for their citizens better. So all these are the kinds of things, they're very different skills than when you're actually doing something yourself. So it's meant retraining our staff. It's meant finding different kinds of skills than people who are used to providing the direct services. And then, as you said, I think the whole area of measurement is one that we're still struggling with, because there's this saying that you do what you measure. So if you keep measuring the same sort of parameters, we're going to keep doing the same sort of work. And if we want to get out of doing work that doesn't sustain change, then we've also have to figure out how do you measure that, because that's ultimately how you can drive your work. So I think we're still working with all of those areas. How do you change from something that's very tangible? I often say Habitat for Humanity, organization that I love, very much. In some ways, they've got the best of all worlds. They've got this really tangible thing that you can get people, go and build a house, and you've got them forever. They are committed to Habitat for Humanity because they felt it. It's a lot harder to have people feel community empowerment from a distance. So I think all of those are the kinds of things that we grapple with.
There's so many places around the world that can benefit from care. How do you prioritize your initiatives?
Yeah, well, a lot of the countries that we're in are countries that we went to because of an emergency and then stayed. So we're in most of the countries that we've been in for 40, 50 years now because we started out with doing emergency work and then gradually evolved. Or they're countries where because the development priorities are so acute. So for instance, a country that we were in, that we phased out of, but we're actually starting a program again, is Liberia, because this is a country that now has a new government, has a fresh start, and there's a lot of potential to really work and be able to help them be successful at a very critical time. So, it's a combination of being there because of a disaster. Pakistan is a good example. We went in 2006 with the Pakistan earthquake and have remained there to continue the development work. So, it's a combination of that as well as other overall imperatives and being asked in oftentimes by countries because the needs are great. And then within the country, we prioritize based on who else is there, what the greatest needs are, where are the biggest gaps, et cetera. Yes?
This might be a good follow-up question. I was just wondering, as some of the world's wealth shifts into countries that have cultures where charity has a distinctly different meaning, just where you see the future of charity going. Is it changing in the next 20 to 40 years?
Give me an example of what you mean by different sense of charity.
Well, some of my friends from Asian countries, perhaps, they might feel it's more of the government's role to contribute to charity, maybe less of a personal matter.
It's interesting because we see that in universities, that there's a different culture of giving back to your university.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess partly, again, because we work in the non-governmental sector and work with communities to help them really identify what their greatest needs are. And we don't think of it as charity. We think of it as capacity building and think of it as how do you help communities that are living on the margin. We're talking about communities who are living on less than $1 a day in most cases. Those are poor communities who governments have failed them often. So I don't think it's so much of a situation of a cultural mindset as much as, these are incredibly poor communities that are lacking oftentimes just basic human existence that we work with and help to develop their capacity to have the wherewithal to continue to improve their lives.
I feel like I didn't ask my question right. I'll think about it a little more.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Dr. Jay talked about the role of microfinance and how you are working with Educate Core, ICSCI.
Right.
How do you see CARE integrating microfinance as a tool as we start doing a lot more about the underlying process and educating people on some of the causes of poverty and helping them to get out of it rather than just giving them the food, helping them to make food for themselves. So how do you see CARE using its network and being in 70,000 countries with 40,000 people, do you see using microfinance as a tool going forward?
Yeah, microfinance is a large effort for us. And in fact, we started a type of microfinance that's now been used as a model, including in India and other places, that's less about lending from commercial banks. I mean, we do now work with commercial institutions, but really helping people to mobilize their own assets. So we started it in Niger and West Africa, where women, traditionally it was women, but not exclusively, would just do saving small amounts. It might amount to what would be pennies for us, but pooling that together and developing a community savings pool, and with a real emphasis on saving first, because just like most of us in this room, the first financial act that we did wasn't to take out a loan, it was to save first. And once you save, you actually have a sense of security that then allows you to take out a loan. So people pool their resources together and then make loans to that community group. They make loans with interest, repay it, and they can use it for usually, oftentimes it's for starting a small business. And then we give them the business skills so that they are able to be better at their business investments, figure out what's the better and more lucrative business. They then make money that they can then put back into this savings pool, can loan, develop more loans for people who are in that group. And we found this to be an incredibly empowering tool in and of itself. But, you know, a lot of the microfinance work has shown that people have put too much emphasis on the financial transaction and the repayment. And yes, people in microfinance have been incredibly good about the repayment, but that doesn't necessarily change their sense of power or their ability to be actors in their own society. So we've really coupled our microfinance programs with women's empowerment programs and health programs and reproductive health programs and education programs. In fact, there's a really neat program I went to in Guatemala called Edubanco. So it's education and banking. A woman can take out a loan if she agrees to send her daughter to school. So you have now not only a woman being able to take out a loan, start a business, but she also is educating her daughter. And you go to these villages and you talk to these women, and they have found a new sense of themselves. They're contributing to their families, and their daughters now feel incredibly empowered. They're going to school alongside with their brothers. Girls were not sent to school in most of these communities. They have a different sense of themselves, and so the whole family prospers. So I think it's using microfinance as a wedge for broader development.
I just want to know, you talked about partnerships earlier and about public health and how, you know, examples like Coke and Starbucks play in your success. I wonder if you could go a little bit further to talk about maybe some of the major healthcare organizations globally and the partnerships potentially that you have with them and their impact on your success, and maybe just the overall future of global healthcare as well when you think of companies like GE or Philips and Siemens, and how much of a partnership you may have with them.
Yeah. In the health arena, we haven't had as many private sector partnerships. We've worked more with organizations like my former organizations, CDC, and other global organizations. We're looking at working with some of the pharmaceutical companies. Merck, for instance, has been one of the pharmaceutical companies that's done the most, I think, in terms of doing philanthropic work that helps to develop community health, and they're looking at maybe doing some work that would look at particularly improving women's health and maternal mortality. So I think there's some opportunities. We just haven't done as much with the private sector in health as we have with the private sector in some of the other areas we've worked in. But the potential is there, in this, you know, I think in the same way.
Dr. Gayle, you mentioned the work that you're doing with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. One of the jewels, I guess, in Emory's crown is the Carter Center. And what's your relationship with the Carter Center? I know some of the things are compatible, but some are, but it seems to be quite an interesting relationship that you can build.
Yeah, we're looking at building more. I've had a long-standing relationship with the Carter Center going back to my days at CDC. We have had some discussions with the Carter Center. I think there's a lot more potential. One of the things that I want to do in health, and I've been there 2 years, you can't get to everything all at once, so there's still a few things left to do. But is really looking at in health. I mean, we've got such incredible resources here between Emory, CDC, the Carter Center, CARE. You know, I think we have a real Morehouse. We have a real kind of you know, nexus of different kinds of health organizations that really could do some very interesting things together. CARE and CDC has a long-standing cooperative agreement where we've been working in multiple countries on HIV, on avian influenza, a little bit of tuberculosis and malaria. But we'd like to look at ways that we could do more of that. And again, because I've had a long-standing relationship with the Carter Center, that's been a real interest. So we're looking at having some of these partnerships here in Atlanta. I think it's really ripe for that.
When Helene says she hasn't been able to get to everything, the first thing was to get out to the field with your people, since 95% are out there, and you went to Afghanistan, I think, right away,
Right.
and it's not all glamour in some sense. I guess you don't get to sleep in your own home half the nights you're out of the country. But I do think that's part of the sacrifice you make, but also part of your greatness. And
Well,
now,
part of what's exciting. I do a lot. I do travel a lot. Last year they calculated, I kept saying, well, I think I'm traveling about 40, 50%. My office calculated was 70%. That's too much, and I'm trying to reduce that. And half of that's here in this country, and half of it's overseas. But I just find the work and getting to the country offices the most inspiring part of my job. To go and see in a very tangible way how you are making a difference in people's lives. And to hear things like, I was talking to a woman in Ethiopia not too long ago who said, before I started in this program, it's a program for adult literacy, I felt like I was in darkness. This program has helped me turn on the light. And I mean, people have that very vivid sense of, that something happened that's tangible and my life is now very different than it was before. And that's, it's pretty gratifying.
it's beautiful.
Yes?
When you go into countries, is there restrictions as to access, as who's allowed to partake in the program? Do you have a restriction or a cutoff?
For
People who can enter, who can work with CARE, do you have a limited number that you can represent or you can sponsor within each country?
Well, the people who work for CARE are professionals that we hire. So it really depends on the programs. In India, for instance, the CARE office at one time was as many as 900 people. In Afghanistan, I think we have about 500 employees. So it really varies on the number of programs we're actually doing at any one period of time. And our employees are based on which grants we have to be able to take, to undertake certain programs. So it's really, it's people that we hire are very much linked to the programs that we're doing.
I kind of was referring more to if people come to you, to the individuals who are seeking help. Are there ever individuals who are turned away within a country? If a woman comes to you and wants to be part of a microfinance program, would there ever be an instance where, a program was full and there was no more room for another?
No, well, again, I think our programs are bound by how much money we have,
Okay.
and how large a program can be. I doubt that there's a lot of situations where people are turned away as such, because we generally work in a defined geographic area and work with whoever is interested in being involved. So there's usually a community worker that goes out and talks to people about the program and invites people in. So it's not so much a situation of having to turn people away as how large can a program be based on the resources that we have, what the objective of the program is. You had,
With the plethora of NGOs all over in developing nations like Nigeria, where I'm from, how does CARE continue to maintain that message? How do you maintain your identity in this large group of NGOs that come and render services, that jump on the bandwagon of HIV/AIDS, malaria, whatever is being funded? You have a lot of NGOs. How does CARE continue to maintain that focus over the years?
yeah, I think because we have usually been where we are working for many, many years and really develop a niche for what our work is in the community versus other NGOs. And so generally speaking, the NGOs talk to each other, the large international NGOs, and I know in countries oftentimes, and depending on where there are resources, you can have a whole group of NGOs spring up overnight when there's resources available. But I think for the large international NGOs that have been there for many years, there, in terms of building the kinds of programs that we can build, because we do have size and ability to handle large amounts of resources, that's very different. Small NGOs can't get the kind of large grants that we can get because they just don't have the management structure to be able to do that. And it's a big job to manage and move millions of dollars at a country level, and to have the kinds of systems to be able to be accountable to donors. So I think that's less of an issue because there are fewer of those NGOs, and we do all talk to each other. The Save the Children and the World Vision and CARE and Catholic Relief Services. Everybody knows what we're doing, and we try to work in a way that doesn't put more burden on the country, making sure that we're working with country counterparts to work on the things that are of high priority, and hopefully use that as a way of better coordinating the work at the country level. But you're right, I mean, there is a lot of collision at the country level.
I guess let's come to this side for a second, and then here as well. We'll go 1, 2. Then you've been waiting forever, so maybe we'll go 1, 2, 3 in rapid fire. You're first.
So, taking into account the recent changes, and not just the U.S. but the world economy, how has CARE, or has there been an effect in CARE's ability to raise and utilize funds, especially from the countries that have had an increase in fluctuation of wealth?
Yeah, so far, if you mean kind of the current economic situation, so far that hasn't really affected CARE because our funding tends to be in multi-year funding. So, and because we get 50% of our resources are from the U.S. government, so our foreign assistance program, that doesn't change with fluctuations in the economy in the short run. It could in the long run. We get another substantial amount from foundations like Gates Foundations and others. They're not as vulnerable to price fluctuations because they have their corpus, their overall amount, and they have to spend a certain amount of that by law. So unless they actually really, there have been a few situations where some foundations have had the bottom dropped out financially, then they do have real change in their funding. But for the most part, it doesn't affect foundations in the short run. Then it's really only the individuals that we get. We get about 20% of our funding from individual contributions. That's where I think we might see a hit. But interestingly, financial fluctuations for some reason don't seem to affect international organizations as much as they affect domestic organizations. And I don't know if that's because people who, individual donors who give to international organizations are already doing that on top of their domestic interest or not. But I don't know if for some reason the trends show that international organizations just aren't hit as much when there's financial fluctuations. So far, no, but just depends on how deep and how long this goes.
Okay, young lady, Jessica.
I know that public health funding often follows kind of the hot topic of the day, be it preparedness or pandemic flu. So how do you balance like where the money is versus CARE's strategic objectives of, say, empowering women?
Yeah, and I think it's not just public health funding. I think in general, funding goes with what certain trends are and what the hot issue is. And it is a real issue for any organization that depends on external funding, particularly when your largest funder is the U.S. government or other governments, because we're part of a large federation that includes European CARE affiliates, and we get money from European governments as well. So yes, I mean, I think there is that tendency. What we've tried to do is to diversify our funding base so that we're not as dependent on any one trend, and that we have enough of a diversified funding base that we can actually draw on different sources of funding and hopefully be able to use that in a way that is strategic. We have turned down resources, not necessarily because of fad, but because we thought that resources weren't in keeping with our overall philosophy about what makes a difference for ending global poverty. So we have turned down funding. in a couple of situations where we thought it just wasn't the right thing to do. So.
Now, way in the back, we'll get you in the informal. This is the last question, so it has to be good.
Not all of us will be able to work in a career in NGOs or nonprofit sector, but many of us will have the opportunity to serve on boards, nonprofit leaders, volunteers with the boards. Can you talk about just the importance that board members bring their skills to the table in terms of coming from the corporate community? Might not be their day job, but the importance of that to your organization and to others in the nonprofit world.
That's a great question, Daniel. Yes, I think it is, and I think it is another way in which people can make a difference. And let me just step back and say, I want all of you to go out and make lots of money, because it is very important to have people who make money to be able to contribute and to be able to serve in a variety of ways. So I don't think that the only way to do good is by working in an organization that's committed to social issues or so the not-for-profit world. So it's important to have people who go into the corporate world and make money and do good things in other ways. I think serving on boards is a great way not only of helping organizations like ours, but it's also a great way to give back. And so I encourage you to do it. I'm on more not-for-profit boards than I need to be, given that I run one. But I think it's also a great opportunity to see other organizations and how they do things. It's really valuable to have the board members that we have who have diverse backgrounds, university backgrounds, financial services, corporate leaders, et cetera, because I think they do bring different vantage points to our work and are really able to help me think through how to lead the organization and think about things in ways that I wouldn't, and so me and our staff. So it's really very, very important to me to have a very diverse board that brings different perspectives and helps me step back a little bit from the day-to-day work that I'm doing and thinking about it in different ways. I think it's a great thing, and it's also, I started just kind of being on not-for-profit boards because of organizations that I had worked with in different capacities, probably going back 15 years. And I just think it's been an incredibly enriching experience, but a great learning experience, because you really do have, it helps you to think strategically. It helps you to think about setting vision and setting goals and how do you help shape an organization. So I just think it's a very, very valuable experience, and one that I hope all of you will do at some point in time. And it is an important way of giving back.
What we're going to do now is something that he doesn't expect. But Dean Larry, if you'll stand up for a second. This is the end of this year's Dean Speaker Series, and we've been able to attract, the Dean has Azim Premji, who along with two friends of Dr. Gayle's, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, are the wealthiest people in the world. He basically invented outsourcing at the highest levels. And then we also had the head of Home Depot, but I also think the ability to attract you here, Helene, you certainly have ended it strong. So I think we should all thank the Dean for the speaker series. And, I was sometimes asked, Helene, what is charisma? People ask professors things, and I don't think it can be defined with words, just like when you're out there in the field with your people or people benefiting. But students, when I try to define something like charisma, I just try to point out a role model. You know it when you see it, when you hear it. And if you think about Helene's brilliance, her focus, her strategic ability, her energy, I think if she was in the private sector getting stock options, she would be a much financially wealthier woman. But Helene, you're a very wealthy woman for what you do in the world and how everyone loves you. Helene Gayle. I think Helene has a few minutes, because I did see a few more questions. He has the dinner tonight on behalf of CARE, but you're going to ask a few questions.